Hi, I'm Tye Justis. William Cameron Menzies' 1953 color sci-fi cult classic Invaders from Mars, distributed by 20th Century Fox, was the first science fiction film ever given the prestigious color treatment. Invaders was purposely released months before George Pal's highly anticipated and highly budgeted War of the Worlds would change the face of the genre forever. Now, being released first was a concerted effort on producer Edward L. Alpertson's part in order to win the buzz generated by being the first science fiction film ever released in color, an expensive process usually reserved for prestige properties, like best-selling books or well-known tales that were sure to generate a robust, pre-established adult audience. Invaders from Mars was the first of many more substantially budgeted science fiction films to come, many of which were inspired by this film either directly or because the children who saw it originally grew up to make epic blockbusters themselves, like Steven Spielberg, John Landis, and Joe Dante. The director, William Cameron Menzies, thankfully wasn't new to complicated, intricate productions. He was also well regarded in his field of production design or art direction, being the first to receive an Academy Award for production design for The Tempest in 1929. Menzies also was no stranger to special effects films, having worked on the silent classics Robin Hood in 1922, The Thief of Baghdad in 1924, and The Lottery Bride in 1930. Menzies' foray into science fiction didn't actually begin with Invaders from Mars either, but with the adaptation of H.G. Wells' Things to Come in 1936, nearly a decade and a half earlier. Having proven himself by the time he was working on Gone with the Wind in 1939, David O. Selznick famously gave Menzies carte blanche during the making of his own magnum opus in a memorandum stating Menzies is the final word. Even for just art direction, this was huge, coming from the producer and studio executive who was notoriously hands-on in every aspect of production, ad nauseum. Invaders stands the test of time for reasons akin to its unique storytelling, production value, methodical execution by Menzies, and low-budget cost-cutting measures all in one. Invaders from Mars is about a brainy little boy who witnesses a spaceship crash land in his backyard. Soon after, his entire world is turned upside down as one by one his parents and just about everyone he loves and trusts are turned into violent, curt versions of themselves by an unknown, powerful alien force. This was much like the plot of Invasion of the Body Snatchers made a few years later. As US and Soviet tensions flared, along with atomic and Cold War paranoia, political witch hunts, and the ever-looming and very real threat of nuclear annihilation, science fiction became more of a mainstay in the movies, possibly because it was seen as a way of somehow understanding the terrifying new sciences of war that seemed to be growing by frightening leaps and bounds every day. It could have also tapped into audiences' shared human frailty and existential dread because of the now very real threat of thermonuclear destruction. Sci-fi was quickly becoming less Flash Gordon and more the day after with every passing headline. Science fiction was also realized as a perfect radical vehicle to explore the deeper meanings of current events, such as race and politics, through the subtext of extraterrestrials and strange new worlds without the censors catching on and putting a stop to it. The Cold War also gave us more subversive enemies, unlike World War II, which gave the opponent clear-cut iconography, particular haircuts, and precise robotic gesticulation. Communism seemed to create an antagonist that wore no visible insignia but who hated American democracy in their hearts and minds all the same, virtually invisible to the world around them, making them the worst kind of enemy, one you couldn't see until it was too late. Invaders from Mars starred Jimmy Hunt, Helena Carter, Arthur Franz, Morris Ankrum, Leif Erikson, and Hilary Brooke. The film's taken from young Hunt's point of view as the intrepid young protagonist David. Since Invaders from Mars plays out from the point of view of a child, under the designer's eye of Menzies, it feels very much like a child's nightmare. What set this film aside from its contemporaries was the fact that it didn't necessarily end and was lit like a Technicolor production while being printed in a new and more complicated process called Super Cinecolor, while actually being shot on Eastman Color Negative. This multi-strip process, a step up in quality from normal two-tone Cinecolor, brought the photographic cost down to only about 10% above normal black and white. This process also gave vibrant, hyper-realistic color on par with actual 3-strip Technicolor, the most expensive color technology every studio was trying to emulate at the time, only cheaper. Where most failed, Super Cinecolor actually came close. As for the film not really having an ending, it did, just not a traditional one. Invaders from Mars ends with young David as he wakes up as if the events of the entire movie were just a dream. Even in the 50s, this was a tired trope. That is until he sees the same spaceship crash land again, indicating that he's stuck in some sort of time loop, or he just had a premonition of what was to come. That's where the film ends. Pretty unimaginable for the time, or at least it was for England. Thanks to complaints from British film distributors about the movie being too short and wanting a more conclusive ending, extended scenes were shot, and a new ending was created that ensured British audiences that it wasn't just a dream, and that the aliens did in fact die at the end of the picture. The new scenes were shot a year after principal photography had ended, so aside from costume and slight continuity errors, little Jimmy Hunt had gotten taller and had a shorter haircut, the new scenes all blended relatively well, but the original ending, the American ending, is still the best. What's usually remembered about Invaders is the aliens themselves when they're finally seen. The extraterrestrial leader was a unique and interesting disembodied head in a round glass case that communicated telepathically with its minions, dressed in tacky green felt jumpsuits complete with hokey masks and visible zippers up their backs. This part of the production showed the film's low-budget origins in spite of its high-concept color. That aside, the film had a bright cast that really took the material and kept it plausible, allowing audiences to suspend disbelief for most of the film's 77-minute runtime. Ingenious design and direction elevated this film above its predecessors, and thanks to a new and quite breathtaking 4K restoration by Ignite Films, with contributions from the George Eastman Museum, it can now be seen clearer and sharper than it probably was when it was shown in theaters in the 50s. Ignite Films, who graciously sent me a Blu-ray copy to review, headed a monumental restoration for this film. This is their first release, and I have to say that I'm pretty impressed. They caught my attention initially on Instagram with their psychedelic trailer announcing their restoration and upcoming release.
David tells me he's seen a spaceship.
Anytime you have separate classic color elements, especially multi-strip, it gets complicated. Different elements age, fade, shrink, and distort in different ways and have to be matched and restored separately, then combined and calibrated. As complicated as they were to produce, films using 3-strip color are even more complicated to restore many decades later. That's why the team at Ignite Films really caught my attention. I love 3-strip Technicolor, and this film was purposely lit like Technicolor even though it used a different 3-strip process. William Cameron Menzies meticulously planned it that way since Technicolor was so successful and loved by everyone at the time. The booklet included in the Ignite Films release is 23 pages and stuffed with restoration information. I love it when companies bring you in on their restoration process, and Ignite really breaks down the, as they call it, nightmare restoration process in great detail, even explaining the complicated Super Cinecolor process itself. The end result of this restoration is a bright, clean, and grain-filled movie-watching experience without one pop or scratch in sight. Inherent imperfections are minimal but present due to the age of the material, like soft shots because of optical transitions, and color haloing that's part and parcel to 3-strip color. But those effects have been greatly minimized by the restoration team, making for a very enjoyable watch. The special features are another great bonus. There are plenty of featurettes, from the restoration to interviews with cast member Jimmy Hunt, Little David himself. The only thing I would love on future releases from this company would be audio commentaries, or at least one audio commentary. Otherwise, its supplements are terrific.
Gee whiz!
After receiving the Blu-ray for review from Ignite, I enjoyed it so much that I went out on my own and bought a 4K copy to get the full experience in 4K. To support the company as well, and so I could honestly review the release without any question of obligation. The 4K image is actually even more stunning, but the Blu-ray is a very close second, almost indistinguishable. The 4K disc just slightly wins out due to the higher resolution and bitrate. They have the same special feature set, and both discs have amazing color. In the ethereal realm of The Incredible Shrinking Man and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, made on the heels of Invaders from Mars, this film stands on its own as an example of early Cold War and atomic age paranoia combined, made essentially for children of all ages, with an ending more like something out of a low-budget Chris Nolan film than that of early American science fiction. Luckily, Menzies and his team didn't necessarily see this project as childish or cheap. They approached it as if they were shooting a low-budget, high-concept film and did their level best. The end results generally freaked out future filmmakers as kids to create the blockbusters generations have grown to love and be inspired by today. Invaders from Mars marked a high bar for the production and quality of science fiction. It was shot in color, and aside from heavy use of stock military footage to pad out its running time, I believe it inspired more often heralded sci-fi of the era that we now consider classic. That aside, Invaders from Mars stands on its own as a cult classic and should be enjoyed as such. And thanks to the new restoration by Ignite Films, everyone can do just that.
Gee whiz!
I'm Tye Justis. Gee whiz, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.